So next I want to talk about the significance of AlphaGo to the Go community and what it brought just in these 5 games. And I said that when the series started, no one knew. Was it going to be a derivative player, just copying human moves, or was it going to bring something new to the table? And it answered with a resounding yes, it was going to bring new moves to the table. And some of these moves were really brilliant. And most of these games contained shoulder hit variations that humans hadn't really thought about. And I promise that there's going to be a book about AlphaGo and the shoulder hit, or what we've learned from AlphaGo, just about that diagonal move that I showed in every game. But it goes deeper than that, and that's the idea of how good is AlphaGo. And there's some skeptics out there, and they say, well, it's got these bugs. But you can feel the strength of AlphaGo because in every single game it came up with brilliant moves. These are the kind of moves that people will be talking about for years, and that will change the way people perceive the board, perceive the game, and play the game. These are the kind of moves that Go players hope to come up with, maybe once in their life. And yet AlphaGo was able to do it every game. In my lifetime there was a Go player who came up with moves like this. His name was Go Saigen, and there's no doubt he's going to go down as a Go saint, just like the kid I talked about at the beginning of the video. That's someone who helped advance the game remarkably, and he had a bunch of moves through his career where he would do such a thing. But even as great as he was, he didn't do it in every game he played, and AlphaGo did. In each of the games it showed us so far, it's revealed something about the nature of Go that we hadn't seen before. And that's why AlphaGo is magnificent, and why this series was tremendous. Now, with regard to this brilliance, I'm still wondering if a future version of AlphaGo can teach us more. And I mentioned that AlphaGo was trained initially with 150,000 games from human players. My question is, does this have some sort of anchoring effect? And what if AlphaGo had been allowed to learn the game completely on its own? And would that have a different outcome? Would it view the board differently? I guess what I'm saying is, does learning its first games from humans have an anchoring effect? That it's going to play like a human because that's how it learned. And what if it could learn totally on its own? Now I bring this up because this has actually been done with other games. And someone applied a similar methodology to backgammon. And the artificial intelligence for that one taught itself how to play. And in teaching itself how to play, it actually revised opening theory. And openings and moves that have been common and considered proper for centuries were disproven by this backgammon bot, which is called TD Gammon. And I'll put a link down below to discuss that. Now, I actually would wager that DeepMind tried to let AlphaGo learn on its own first, before trying using the human games in what I'm calling anchors, and maybe it was more difficult than it seemed, or didn't have the success. But I would wager they tried a completely self-taught technique first. But if not, boy, that would be really interesting. What kind of moves would it come up with if it wasn't anchored by humans? So how else is AlphaGo significant in the world of Go? Well, one thing I really liked is the words of Lee Sedol. He's a Chinese professional, and he was very passionate about this series. And he equated human knowledge, just knowing the rules of Go, as being on the ground. And the sum of our knowledge in terms of Go, all the expertise we've been able to gain, is the height of a human. And that he feels the potential of Go is the sky. And his hope is that AlphaGo and other artificial intelligence will help us learn more. And he puts it this way: without Go artificial intelligence, we will never know where we are between the sky and the ground in the world of Go. In other words, do we know 5% of what there is to know about Go, or do we know 50% or 90% of what there is? We can't know, but maybe AlphaGo can teach us. Pretty cool. And then one of the other interesting things that's happened is how are Go professionals reacting to this? After all, these are people who've dedicated their lives to learning the game. And And AlphaGo has created sort of a feeling of insecurity. Now, I've got a friend, and she's a professional, and she's been teaching me for a long time, and she's always felt comfortable telling me, Brady, that move's bad. Oh no, you can't play that, that's bad. But AlphaGo's undermine that confidence a little bit, and she'll say, I wouldn't play that, but I can't tell you it's bad. And the reason is, it's because AlphaGo played so many surprising moves, and so this has reduced her certainty, which is really interesting. And I've heard that the same thing is happening with a lot of other pros who are saying similar things. What would AlphaGo play? I was kind of curious. And someone told the story of why wouldn't anyone want to play AlphaGo? I mean, that would be so cool, talking about professionals. And indeed, most professionals do seem to want to. But someone turned and said, well, how would you feel about playing AlphaGo for the future of your job? And I guess that kind of puts it in perspective, right? I think Go professionals are somewhat threatened by this, and maybe rightfully so. Maybe AlphaGo or his successors are going to be able to teach us more about Go than any human can. And I guess if my living depended on Go, that would make me a little bit nervous. So now we in the Go world are left with an uncertainty. I mean, AlphaGo is amazing, but it's not really the chief function of DeepMind by any stretch. And in a way, it's just a proving ground. I think the most important thing to come out of AlphaGo isn't its Go skills. It's actually the way it has mimicked human thinking. We think of human thinking as being a mixture of logical skills and logical functions and intuition. And computers have always been good at the logical part, if-then statements, and advancing up to the point of these Monte Carlo tree searches for this application. But that's always been a strength of computers, but they've never had intuition. And that's what's so cool, is that DeepMind, using its various engines, has helped the computer develop an intuition of what the right move might be. And I think this will have applications, really important applications, outside of the world of Go. Well, what does that mean? Because we as Go players really want more AlphaGo. Well, unfortunately, that's uncertain. And DeepMind is not committed to continuing development of this program. And I mean, again, to their credit, they published all the details in Nature, so other people can reproduce it. But if Google doesn't do it, then we're going to lose, at least a year as other people try to mirror its approach. But so I really hope, and DeepMind, if you're listening, please leave an engineer on AlphaGo and develop it. And if any of the bugs we've talked about are fixable, fix it, and play Kujia, and put the program on servers and let humans play it, because it would be so cool. And you owe us nothing. You've already done your bit, and thank you very much. But go on, give us just this little bit more. And there is some hope. Aja Huang, the guy who was playing all the moves for AlphaGo, has created an account on the popular Go server KGS, and hasn't committed to using it yet, but there is hope that we're going to see AlphaGo games in the real world. So what's next then for DeepMind? Well, again, we didn't know this, and there's various applications, but Blizzard Entertainment recently announced that they've been in discussions with Google, and that supposedly DeepMind is going to develop a bot to play StarCraft 2, which is a super popular a real-time game, and this would bring a whole new element. The idea is that Go is turn-based, incredibly complex, but turn-based, and turning its attention to a real-time game would present a whole new set of problems, and it would be really interesting to see how it performs there. And I suspect that the naysayers within the StarCraft world will be met with the same surprise as the naysayers within the Go world. So what are the longer-term prospects for DeepMind? We don't really know. I mean, obviously it's useful, this deep learning, it's useful for image recognition, and presumably they're going to find lots of applications for it. Anywhere where thinking like a human is going to be helpful, a mixture of logical thought and intuition. And I'm sure there's going to be medical applications. Who knows, maybe it can be used for self-driving cars, in which case their experiments with Blizzard would make sense, real time versus turn-based. But I think we're going to be hearing a lot more about neural networks and deep learning in the coming years. Okay, moving on from AlphaGo and DeepMind, I want to talk a little bit about Lee Sedol, because he faced a tremendous amount of criticism over his performance in this series, and I think a lot of that is unfair. And it's true. He is probably no longer the strongest player in the world. And I would draw parallels with tennis to this. It's kind of like he's Roger Federer to Djokovic. And right now, Djokovic is better than Federer. But Federer still holds the most titles and is no slouch and is one of the very best in the world. And I don't think AlphaGo had to play the number one player to prove itself. Playing a top 5 player is good enough, and especially playing a top 5 player who's proven himself in pressure situations for more than a decade. So I think there's some criticism that he was the wrong opponent, but I just don't think that's reasonable. And one thing I really admired about how Lee Sedol approached this is he didn't just play his game all the time. I'm just going to fight. And instead, in the first game, he tried to see if AlphaGo had memorized openings and if he could confuse it. And he kept adjusting his style throughout. And I think this helped him win in game 4, but it will also help future opponents of AlphaGo. If Lee Sedol had just single-mindedly played one style, we would know a lot less about AlphaGo than we do today. And for those critics who didn't like his moves, well, most of them didn't find better moves in real time. And even those that did, it's always so much easier to watch a game of Go or any event like this than it is to play. Armchair quarterback is much easier than the real quarterback, if you know what I mean. And then finally, I'd like to go back to this move, the Hand of God move. So this move was dubbed the Hand of God by Lee's longtime rival, Gu Lee. But how can it be called the Hand of God? I've already said it doesn't work. But this is what's so interesting about it, because any human opponent, and by that I mean professional, who is playing Lee Sedol in this case, probably would have found the refutation and won the game. But AlphaGo, as smart as it is, doesn't think like us. Number one, it didn't use time. Don't know if that's fixable. And number 2, it doesn't think in certainties, that a certain sequence of moves just plain works, and instead it thinks in terms of probabilities. So a human would have found a sequence that worked and would have ended the game, but AlphaGo just played the move that it thought maximized its chance of success, a different way of thinking. Against any other opponent, this wouldn't work. But against this opponent, at this time, and in this game, maybe the move was perfect. Maybe it was the Hand of God. And I'm not a religious person, but to me it does have a touch of that feeling of the divine, that maybe this was one last gift to humanity, one last victory over AI in this wonderful game that we have invented. So I want to wrap up with one last level at which we Go players appreciated this game. And that was on an emotional level. And it was kind of curious that as this was going on, I had friends that I talked with, Go friends, that I talked with on an ongoing basis. And even those who professed not to care so much about this series, it was just universally true that there was a heightened level of emotion amongst all the Go players I know as this was going on. And sometimes the interactions were a little sharper than normal, and sometimes people seemed to be a little bit more sensitive than normal. But we players who were just watching, I just feel that there was a heightened sensitivity, an emotional aspect to this game. And that was definitely true of me. I was going through some paperwork for the government at the time, and I was definitely getting more irritated with it than I should. But if we, just regular Go players, were reacting, somewhat emotionally, just think about what it would be like to be there. What if you were one of the broadcasters, people like Chris Garlock, who did the official broadcasts, or Andrew Jackson, who did the American Go Association's broadcasts. And they're not professionals, but there were people who were there in the moment, and maybe they had to deal with things like audio-visual issues and getting interviews. But man, their emotional levels must have been 10 times higher than mine. But even that's just the beginning. What if you were a developer at DeepMind? Don't tell me they weren't feeling emotion. This was some of the DeepMind team that was there in Seoul after Game 3. I mean, could they be any happier? They were just clinching the series and proving the superiority of their AlphaGo AI. And then this lower picture is that same DeepMind team at the conclusion of Game 4 when they actually fell to Lee Sedol. So tell me these guys aren't really feeling it at an emotional level. Well, then the next group to look at didn't just spend 2 years like the DeepMind team did. They've been spending their entire lives dedicated to this game of Go. And I'm talking about the professionals. And there's hundreds of them around the world, in Korea, Japan, and China. And they've disseminated. I mean, some of the Go professionals live in the US now, and Europe, and Australia. And how must they be feeling right now? They've dedicated their entire life to this game, and suddenly they're getting surpassed by a computer. And I think you could see a great example of some of the emotions in the professionals in the writings of Lee Sedol, who I mentioned earlier. Even if you're a layperson, if you read his second post down below about Lee Sedol, it's really not about the Go, and it's more about how poorly he believes others are reacting to it. And the emotion in that paper is just tremendous, and I think it really lets you know how people are feeling about it. Well, if all the other pros are feeling so emotional, there's one other person who has to be feeling it so much more, and that's Lee Sedol. And it's been fascinating watching him through this series. And people complained. People complained that this match was being played right on the heels of another tournament that Lee Sedol partook in. And he was playing his first game of this one just a few days after his final game of the other. And that was unfair. Well, other people said that. Lee Sedol didn't. And people complained that Lee Sedol didn't have access to a library of AlphaGo's games, but AlphaGo had access to all of Lee Sedol's games, which was turned out to be an irrelevant argument. But Lee Sedol didn't make the argument. Other people did. And then there were accusations of conspiracy, and Lee Sedol didn't start a really difficult fight in the first games. This is something that we in the Go world called a ko, and people wanted to see how AlphaGo would respond to ko. And when Lee Sedol didn't start it, then people started saying, oh, there's a conspiracy, and Google is paying Lee Sedol not to start this fight. But that's ridiculous. How must that weigh on his mind that people would make accusations like that? And then finally, there was the accusations of poor play. Well, Lee Sedol's a top player. And yeah, in hindsight, people have been able to point out moves that were not ideal and weren't the best. But they've also always been able to do that in all of his games, and almost all of everyone's games forever. In hindsight, the mistakes become clear. But in real time, he was playing as a top professional, and he just got beat. But nevertheless, he kept trying, he kept innovating, and he didn't complain. And this gets into the concept of grace, which isn't something I ever really thought I would talk about. And I am just so impressed with the poise of Lee Sedol through all this. He didn't complain. He didn't bite back at reporters or other professionals who were criticizing him. And instead, he was just flexible and went out and he played as best he could. He just happened to lose, but he did it with such poise. And I'm not one to talk about that, wow, that person really demonstrates grace. But amongst Go players, I've never seen more grace than Lee Sedol. And even amongst non-Go players, whoever you might think of, I can't think of many people who have shown more. And it's for that reason that I think he was the perfect opponent for AlphaGo. And I'm glad that he was selected. So to conclude this video, At the beginning of the series, before the first move had been played, the chairman of Alphabet, and also known as Google, his name is Eric Schmidt, and he said it didn't matter who won or lost, that this would be a win for humanity. So then once Lee Sedol had lost, he decided to riff off of Eric Schmidt's words. And he said, this is not a defeat for humanity. This is just a defeat for Lee Sedol. And I think those are wonderful words, and again demonstrate why Lee Sedol was the perfect opponent for DeepMind's AlphaGo. So, thank you, Lee Sedol. Thank you, Google. Thank you, DeepMind. It was a brilliant series. Okay, if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to do the usual things. Subscribe, like, comment. I'd appreciate all of that. But more importantly, if you've interacted with people who've asked you about this AlphaGo match, and non-Go players, whether they be friends or family, and you feel that they get something out of this video, please forward them a link. I'd really like to know what the lay people think about this series after seeing this, whether they'll understand more. So let me know how they react. Thanks. See you next time.